Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm Jennifer Cunningham. I'm the AVP of Alumni Relations here at Lehigh. And we have with us today Dr. Brook Sawyer. She is an associate professor and program director in the College of Education. She got her PhD at the University of Virginia, her master's at University of Pennsylvania, and her bachelor's at the University of Delaware. And she's been at Lehigh since 2012. She's here to talk to us about motivating our children to read during the pandemic. I've got two 14-year-olds, and I am so looking forward to this talk. So the way this works is we have a half an hour together, and I will turn over the presentation to Brook in just a minute. The way that you will ask your questions is after Brook speaks for 5 to 10 minutes. You will have the chance to answer questions. Use the chat box. If you just click on your screen at the bottom, it says chat, and there's a little cartoon bubble. Go ahead and click that, and you'll see a window come up. And you can either pose your questions to the panelists, which means that only Brook and I will see them, or you can address them to all attendees if you want to start a back channel conversation. I will read the questions aloud to Brook so she doesn't need to squint at the screen, and I'm sure you will all have lots and lots of great questions for her, so I will manage that. All right, let's turn it over to Dr. Brook Sawyer.
Okay, thank you so much. I know from the registration that I'm talking to a broad audience of parents and caregivers and teachers ranging from preschool to older. So my comments are fairly universal, so feel free in the chat to ask more specific questions. I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic today. I just wanted to first start out with my vision of literacy. I really like this particular quote from Kate DiCamillo. She says, "Reading should not be presented to children as a chore, a duty. It should be offered as a gift." So I think about that as my ultimate inspiration. I personally love to read, so I really want to pose reading as something that's enjoyable to do rather than kind of a task that has to be done. I also have an adorable little pencil case from Barnes & Noble that says, "If you think reading is boring, you're doing it wrong." And I say that a little facetiously. I know we have children with learning disabilities, particularly reading disabilities like dyslexia, that reading is really hard. And there are other ways to access books, such as ebooks, audio books that still can bring that joy of reading to all children. So before we get started, I thought I would just briefly take a minute to talk about kind of the core skills that we tap into when we're reading. And again, thinking about this from the preschool level and beyond, we have our alphabet knowledge, so understanding the names of letters and the sounds that letters make. Thinking about the richness of our vocabulary. Certainly, if we're reading a story and we don't understand what the words mean, we're going to struggle to decode or read the text, and certainly struggle to comprehend or understand what we're reading. We also think about our little cute picture of the cat here. We can think about that picture in terms of decoding. Can we read the words on the page? Can we sound them out? If we see the word cat on a page, can we say cat? For younger children, we can think about the oral component of that skill. So do they understand, just if we're saying the word cat, that it's comprised of different letters and different letter sounds? Comprehension. Certainly that's why we're reading, right? To understand the story, to enjoy it, to learn something new. And then for older children, so first graders and beyond, we're also focused on fluency. Can they read automatically? Can they read with accuracy? Can they read with expression? Okay, so I have 5 strategies for us to consider today. And some of these go across, any area that we're focused on. The first is creating a routine. So creating this predictable time in your child's day where they know that this is their reading time. So you can, this will vary by family. Some kids will do much better if they're reading in the morning. Some kids will do better in the afternoon. Some kids will do better in the evening time. So whatever works for your family, you want to set a consistent time and eliminate any distractions. So think about where the child is reading, what else might be happening in that environment. I know for my kids, like, the technology's got to get out of there, right? Because if I leave them with a book and their iPad, they're not going to be reading. The second piece is to build stamina. And just like with exercise, we're not going to be able to, the first day we start, go out and be able to run a marathon. So we need to start smaller. We need to set reasonable goals. So watch your child. Think about how long can they read where you're thinking they're really paying attention. They're not getting all squirmy. They're not looking up, right? So if that's 3 minutes, if that's 5 minutes, if that's 10 minutes, start where they are and then consequently add minutes over time. Another idea is to offer them an assist. So let's say you have a child who, can read a paragraph and then they get worn out. So maybe they read a paragraph, you read a paragraph. They read a paragraph, you read a paragraph, and so on. It could be a sentence, it could be a page, it could be a chapter, right? But think about how you can increase their reading time by supporting them. And then also think about setting goals. So how many pages, how many words, how much time will you read today, this week? How can we increase it moving forward? And some kids really respond well if you actually kind of graph it out for them and they can see that their time is going up. That's a real reinforcer for some children, and that will motivate them to keep reading. Another strategy, and this is both obvious and a little challenging, is to provide choice and build on children's interest. So obviously, avid readers, we're not going to keep reading a book that we don't like. We can put it down. We gravitate towards certain books that we enjoy. So we want to think about that for children. So we want to provide them a choice or multiple choices of books. Thinking about like you have to read this one book, that's not so appealing to kids. So think about different ways to access and find book recommendations for kids. When children they don't enjoy reading at first, it can be really hard to figure out what their interests are. It can be a lot of trial and error. So you can ask your friends, your children's friends for recommendations. You can go like Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, Amazon. They all have libraries. They all have different book lists that you can peruse and you can try. The library is great, and there's a resource that I'll share with you after the talk there that you can look. You can get free ebooks. So you're not having to sink a lot of money into this trial and error, but you can access books in different ways. Books that are series, so the same characters are going through multiple books are really nice, because if a kid gets interested in that, then you know the next book that you're going to buy, and kids get to know the characters more. They're more predictable, and that might be a really nice way to introduce children to reading. I know for myself, I loved Nancy Drew books growing up. I'm dating myself. I love Sweet Valley High, right? So my family invested a lot of money in those particular series. And another idea is to create social connections around reading. This is particularly important, I think, during this time of COVID and social distancing, where we don't have those built-in relationships, kids aren't going to school. Is there a way that you can create these social connections around books through like virtual meetups? Maybe you can do a parent-child kind of book club. I did that when I taught middle school. I had a parent-child book club. We didn't do it virtually at the time. We did it face-to-face, but that might be one idea. Get some children together to do a book club. You could also think about pairing older students with younger students. So my daughter she'll be 12 tomorrow. And so she does some virtual meetups with her younger cousins, and she reads books to them. So that's good to build the relationship. And she's modeling a joy for reading and sharing with them. And also ways to share book recommendations. So in the resource page that I'll share with you, I'm a member of the Lehigh Valley Reads Steering Committee. And that is maybe a little bit more geared towards younger readers, I would say up until like 2nd or 3rd grade. But there will be a way it's in development for people to share book recommendations that they like. And then you'll be able to go to that site to see, okay, you know, my kid is also in 3rd grade. What does this 3rd grader enjoy reading? And lastly, I think it's really important to recognize that we can work on these reading skills not when we're reading. So we can sneak it in. We can think about it as stealth mode, right? So for younger kids, when we think about like phonological awareness and recognizing that words are made up out of sounds, we can squeak this in anywhere. So I have some examples there. Maybe when you're getting your child breakfast, you could say something like, I'm in the mood for loast for breakfast. Wait, not loast. What's the word that I want? What do I want to eat? And the child would say toast, right? And that's funny. That's a fun game. They don't know that you're working on literacy skills with them. You can have students identify letters or read words in any activity that you're doing. So if you and your child like to cook together, you can look at letters and words in recipes or on boxes, right? So there's lots of ways to do that. I'm also a big fan of audiobooks, especially for kids who don't really love to read. They can still hear the modeling of the fluent reading. They can still enjoy a story. They can still work on comprehension skills through audiobooks. Facebook right now is exploding with different organizations who are reading books to children. You can tell stories, right? So some families don't always enjoy reading together, but you can tell stories, encourage your child to tell stories, you know, what happened in their day, what happened in your day. And those narrative skills are a strong predictor of children's reading skills. So that's also a good one. And then to capitalize on our kids' love of television, right? You can talk to them about what they're watching, help them make predictions, help them make inferences about, well, why would so-and-so do that, right? Work on vocabulary. She just called the game absurd. What do you think that means, right? And maybe you want to do that sparingly so you're not interrupting their show and being annoying. But those are really good strategies to kind of sneak those reading skills into the day-to-day. And lastly, I just want to end with two little gentle reminders. First, and I'm very susceptible to this myself, I'll come up with an idea, my kids will say, I really like this book and I think I'm home free, right? Oh, I've got them, they love to read. And then 2 days later, I'm still prodding. So remember that what works for one child is not necessarily going to work for another child. What works for your child on Monday is not necessarily what's going to work for your child on Friday. So be prepared for those differences. And this throw kindness around like confetti, I'm really talking to you as teachers and parents that this is a really challenging time. Getting kids to enjoy reading is hard enough, right? So be gracious with yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. Just each day is a new day. And then lastly, here are a couple resources that I have posted. I did create a handout that can be shared after the talk that has a whole multitude of resources that you can use. But again, the Lehigh Valley Reads is what I had mentioned earlier in the talk.
Great.
So
Thank you so
that
much,
is all.
Dr. Sawyer. Yes, we've got questions coming in fast and furiously. A couple people are asking about what you could address specifically with struggling readers. So all of the things you just mentioned, the 5 tips, plus kids who are not at grade level or who are struggling with their reading.
Yeah, so it's really important to think about the level of the text. So we want to make sure that what students are reading, they can read independently. If they don't know a lot of the vocabulary on the page, if the teachers talk about Lexile levels, right? If the level of the text is too hard, it's going to really discourage students. But at the same time, we also want to think about what interests students. So students who are really interested in a topic, let's say baseball, and they have a lot of background knowledge, they know a lot about baseball, they're going to be able to read a higher level text around that topic because they have so much knowledge around it. It fills in those gaps. So I would say pay particular attention to the level of the reading. If it's a topic that kids really want to read about and it's too hard for them, maybe that's a time you read together. And again, I think the audiobooks are a great way to go for struggling readers because it builds that love of reading and the love of stories even if students aren't able to decode those texts on their own.
Right, gotcha, thanks. Angelica says, I think you'd mentioned about distractions, and she comments that distraction's different for different people. Some kids focus better with background noise.
Sure.
She read for hours with music playing, and her daughter does that, but the son finds it distracting. So I guess it's one of those things you experiment with.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is interesting. Kate's question is, I'm curious about whether you see a place for a reward for reading. Third graders school uses this approach frequently in terms of challenges for reading. Is this something you recommend at home, or does that make the child miss the intrinsic value in reading?
That is a great question. And I'm not familiar with any research that speaks to this directly in terms of reading programs, but I can certainly look that up. Motivation is really tricky because, right, you have the extrinsic, what motivates you from the outside, like rewards, and intrinsic, what motivates you internally. Rarely it's one or the other. So to me, I think it's really child dependent. The worry with rewards is that once you remove them, the kid might go, no thanks, right? You're not offering me, $5 anymore, so I don't want to read. But yet at the same time, if you're trying to foster that and that's a good motivator for the kid, it might be a good idea. And maybe you just pare that back slowly so it's not like a complete withdrawal. So maybe you offer the reinforcer periodically. But I would say it really depends on the child. My son has no interest in the extrinsic rewards. He's like, no thanks, right? What motivates him is if I actually find a story he'd like, and he's not a big reader.
Right. Ainsley's question is, do you have average times that middle-aged kids should be reading every day this summer?
That's a great question. I think, again, it really depends on the child, and I would say keep pushing the envelope as far as you can go, because the more they read, the more background knowledge they're building, the more vocabulary they're building. So if your child can read for 15 minutes, try to build on that. They can read for 5, build on that. I wouldn't give it a hard number. Just think about your family's day and your child.
Yeah. Karen's question is, what do you say to people who say audiobooks are not really reading?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of research on this. Marianne Wolf has actually written a really good book. I think it's called Reading in the Digital Age. And she does say that audiobooks, you don't process them as well. You don't remember the content as well. Anecdotally, I find that with myself for sure. I have to rewind because I space out. But I take that with a grain of salt. Some people really much prefer audiobooks. To me, any reading is good reading. I don't have a problem with audiobooks.
Yeah. There are a couple of questions in here that are similar, but for different age groups.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that the 5 things you said were good for all ages. Are there any specifics for different ages? Like if a 5th grader versus an 8th grader versus a kindergartner, are there specific things that you do for different age groups, or are those 5 things kind of universal and then you just tweak them?
I think they're universal to have, but maybe the skills that you're focusing on are different. For younger students, you might be more likely to focus on the decoding aspect, so helping them sound out words. For older readers, you're going to spend more time focusing on understanding the story. Their texts are more complex, so thinking about making inferences about stories. Why would a character do this instead of that? So I think the strategies hold. It's what skills you might focus on within those readings.
Yeah, yeah. Joan's question, how much support should we give to kids when they're on their Chromebooks learning to read? I guess a lot of school districts are just giving out Chromebooks, and that's...
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer because I don't know what the expectation is or the tasks that students are doing on the Chromebooks. So I don't know on that one. Sorry.
Okay. Clarice asks, what about the role of discussing what the child read? Any tips on how this can be done so that it checks their comprehension and reinforces the child's behavior?
That's a great question. So when my son first started to read, so I have a vivid memory. In kindergarten, it was the end of kindergarten, we were reading a book together and we got to the end and I said, "Oh, so what was that story about?" And he looked at me and he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, then we need to read it again." And he broke into tears because he was spending so much energy trying to decode the words. But obviously our ultimate goal is, do they understand what they read? So yes, the comprehension piece is pivotal. So there are different ways, and that's a great one to think about. How do we do that differently at different ages? So with younger kids, if you're sitting together in reading, you could pause periodically as the child is reading and ask them questions. What do you think that this character is going to do next? And you keep reading, and then you help them validate whether their prediction was right or not right, or why did it change. For older students, you may talk to them, once they've read a chapter or two. If you're trying to work on writing too, you could even have a journal that goes back and forth between, if you and your child are reading the same book, which some kids love and some kids are like, "Why would you do that?" Right? So again, very individual. But if you're reading the same book, you could have a journal, like, here's mom's reaction, what do you think? And the kid responds. So that's also a really good way to work on writing skills too.
Oh, great. Meg's question is about graphic novels and how you feel about those and how you transition children away from picture books, onto more adult kind of reading. Right.
Yeah. So again, to me, any reading, I love any reading. So I think graphic novels are amazing. And my daughter has a few, and we would read them together. I actually think graphic novels can be much harder than other types of books because there are these panels, and you have to do a lot of inferencing to understand what happened from this panel to this panel. It's not written out for you. So I think graphic novels are amazing, and I really encourage the use of those. It doesn't give you as much practice with the fluency because there's less text. So I would say, you know, if your child loves graphic novels, that's great. Try to get, you know, one or two other kinds of text in there as well, or audio books. But I don't discourage graphic novels at all.
Great. What is your opinion on reading logs?
Reading logs, and I'm assuming that means like jotting down how often the number.
I would assume so. Yeah.
Pages. Yeah, I think those can be really helpful, and especially if you're thinking about setting a goal and trying to increase that goal, because you could say, oh my gosh, you know, look, Kate, you read 5 pages last Monday, and this Monday you read 12 pages. So it's a good way to reinforce the amount of reading that a child's done, the growth, rather than using them maybe for a punitive kind of measure.
Right. Great. Mary Kate says, regarding the question about audiobooks, there's some nice applications and programs that I've been learning that are about text-to-speech or digital books, allowing the child to both see and hear the text rather than just listen.
That's a great point.
So I guess that's like somebody.
Because then they would have practice hearing the book and then visually seeing. And then I think some even like highlight the words as the book is being read, which is amazing.
Right. Great. All right, no more questions are coming in, so I'm going to ask one. You compared reading to exercise and running a marathon. So should we expect that if our kids are reading, you know, 15 minutes at, say, a 6th grade level at the beginning of the summer, that they are working up to higher grade levels and longer? Is that a reasonable expectation that their muscles do get stronger over the summer, or should we just be content that they're...
Yeah, no, I would continue to push that envelope and think about increasing the amount of minutes. And then as students are reading more, they'll be able to read more complex kinds of texts.
Yeah, and do you find that kids, once they start, like I have this fantasy that once my kids read a great book, that it'll just take off. Does that happen?
Yeah, I have that fantasy as well, and then it's often dashed because I mean, it is the joy of my life when my child says to me, I really enjoyed that book. And I try to keep a very neutral face and not like get happy dramatic about it. I'm like, oh, that's great. But sometimes it takes a little bit to get hold, and then they get busy with other things, and then I got to light that fire again. I'm actually in the middle of doing that with my son right now. He's reading a book. I love Stephen King. I thought, oh, maybe he'll like Stephen King. He doesn't like that so much. We just got him a couple new books to try, and I'm hoping, you know, one of those will work.
Great. Mm-hmm. There's some questions here just about suggesting books specifically for various age groups. And I think you address that in the resources that you send out, right? That Lehigh Valley Learns and other.
Yeah. And I mean, I just actually really did this myself this week with my son. The book sites are so good right now, like Goodreads, Barnes and Noble. I mean, I typed in youth and sports and I got like a list. Now I had to sort, right, because I knew there were certain things that, you know, he didn't want to read about, but they were really good. And then once you kind of hit on those, especially with Goodreads, if kids that's another way that they could log their, instead of doing a reading log, they could create a Goodreads account and they put in there what books they liked and, you know, they rate them, which is really fun. And then it starts telling you based on what you've read, try this book. So then it takes some of that work out.
Right. Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Kimberly has an interesting question about, she says, we're reading The Alchemist together and my 6-year-old is loving it. I keep asking questions and challenge her to give me an example from her own experiences. Another trick I have is to watch foreign movies on Netflix with subtitles on. I think just visually comprehending what's happening would build new skills. And she would love your expert opinion on that, and now on TV.
Oh, I love that. I love that for so many reasons, because it
Yeah.
is, it's kind of that stealth mode, right? You're working on the comprehension. They're seeing the subtitles, so they're making that connection between words that are spoken in the film and the subtitles. It also gives such a positive view on like multiculturalism and appreciating other cultures and other languages. It's really strengths-based perspective of the world. So I love that.
That's a great idea. And on some TVs now, you can turn on closed captioning and even watch that in English. We have time for one more question. Vanessa's about Lexiles and reading levels during this time. Is there a place for us to encourage our students to keep striving for higher levels? And I assume that Vanessa's a teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I would always encourage that. Of course, right? To build the competencies of students over time. Over the summer, we all know that students read less as is. And I think right now they're probably going to read even less because they're off schedule. So I would say I'd focus more on just keeping them reading and reading things that they enjoy, but certainly there's space to work on increasing the complexity of the text that they're reading.
Yeah, great. Well, our time is up for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Sawyer. And like I said, we will be able to send out the Word document that you put together with all of the resources. I'm sure that will keep us busy for a while. And one last question, what are you planning to read this summer? Any good?
Yeah, so I have, I do Goodreads, and so if you email me, it will always tell you at the bottom in my signature what book I'm reading right now.
Nice.
I'm reading the new Sue Monk Kid book, The Book of Longings right now.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you very much. And for those of you on the call, we will be doing a couple more of these from the College of Ed in the coming weeks. So check your email for those.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.